Coming up on Network Africa. Supreme Court in Liberia orders a halt on preparations for Tuesday's rerun elections, cites allegations of fraud from eliminated Liberty Party candidate Charles Walker Brumskin. South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal to hear prosecution challenge to Oscar Pistorius' jail term. Suspected Islamist militant arrested outside Parliament in Tunisia after injuring 2 policemen in a knife attack. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Ayotunde Balogun. We begin with Liberia as they prepare for Tuesday's runoff presidential election. In a surprising twist of events, the Supreme Court has halted preparations for the polls amid fraud allegations. Last month's election was the country's first independently run vote following the end of a civil war back in 2003.
In what seems to be a similar approach to Kenya's annulment of the August 8 presidential elections, Liberia's Supreme Court has ordered the suspension of next week's presidential election runoff. The halt of poll preparations comes as fraud allegations hit the first round of voting that took place on October the 10th. Charles Walker Brumskin, presidential candidate of the Liberty Party, was eliminated in the first round of voting. He brought forward the claims, stating that the vote was characterized by massive systemic irregularities and fraud. Accusation of irregularities is backed by 2 other political parties, including Mr. Boakai's Unity Party, which alleges that President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf attempted to influence the outcome of the poll. Meanwhile, spokesperson for the country's Electoral Commission says although they have not been officially informed by the court to halt preparations, they will abide by an injunction, if any. The runoff, due to be held next Tuesday, is between the front-runner, former football star George Weah, and Vice President Joseph Boakai. The poll is expected to lead to the first smooth transfer of power in more than 70 years, following President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's expiration of her tenure.
Well, there seems to be some calm amid the tensions in major cities of Kenya, but then opposition leader Raila Odinga is still holding on to his rejection of the rerun presidential election. In his first official reaction to the rerun, Mr. Odinga called for a national resistance movement that includes the formation of a People's Assembly that will bring civil society groups together to restore democracy. He also didn't say if he would again go to court to challenge the results. Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta won 98% of the vote with a turnout of under 40%, less than half than recorded in August's vote, largely because of an opposition boycott. Now, the Supreme Court annulled the first vote in August, citing irregularities and illegalities. Now, Ejeta Onoyo, a legal practitioner and a public affairs analyst, joins us on the program Network Africa to take a look at the situation in Liberia. It's great to have you on the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you. Let's look at what's happening. The Supreme Court in Liberia has already ordered a halt on the scheduled Tuesday rerun elections. What do you make of this decision?
It's a little bit troubling, I must say, because the situation that we have in Liberia is going to be a throwback to what we have had in the past, during the period of the Civil War. And I'd like to just put across an anecdote. If someone comes out from mental facility and has been certified healed of his insanity, and suddenly he bursts into a bout of prolonged laughter that is unrestrained, then you begin to wonder whether the insanity has not relapsed or is not recurring. I think that's the situation that we're having with Liberia as we speak. Now, after going through the period, the elections were expected to produce a winner, or to be concluded, as it were. But this recall of the rerun is a little bit troubling, and it should trouble the whole of the sub-region, especially ECOWAS that has invested so much in restoring peace in that old republic of Africa. It's quite troubling.
Now, the opposition, or should I say the the other parties who have been involved in the election, they say that there's some kind of irregularities in the other two political parties, and they're saying that perhaps the the president too, is also alleging that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's interference in the electoral process is rather on a large scale. What would you say to that?
No, I think the accusations of interference and non-compliance substantially with the electoral process in Africa did not just start today. But I think what we should watch out for is whether there is substantial non-compliance with the electoral process, or whether there was an interference that was capable of altering what would have become the outcome of the election. And I think that's what is important. But to say that every irregularity or every non-compliance should be a basis to annul or to scuttle an election is something that we should try to downplay in the electoral processes in Africa. I think that's important. Not every electoral issue, irregularity, should call for the annulment of an election or for an injunction to stop an election.
Perhaps they're looking at what happened or what transpired in Kenya.
Well, what happened in Kenya? I think judicial activism is becoming a little bit on the upscale when it comes to elections. And I don't know why this is happening. Perhaps they're trying to take a cue from what happened in Nigeria in the past, where elections were overturned, were rightly so. But perhaps some of these African nations are beginning to see that there is much power in the judicial sector to take hold and direct the affairs of the electoral processes. But again, the courts must be careful, very careful, to ensure that they do not thwart the will of the people. It's very important.